Behind every punch, every powerful word, there was a silence few heard. Today you'll meet not the champion, but the man who existed behind the myth called Muhammad Ali. He presented himself to the world as the greatest of all time, a giant in the ring, a hurricane outside. Muhammad Ali wasn't just a boxer, he was a symbol of courage, resilience, and self-belief. But while the world saw him as a legend, at home he was an ordinary man, full of doubts, frailties, and desires that had little to do with the public image that had been built around him. His children called him father, his wife, husband, and his friends saw him as someone who, despite his fame, still sought to be understood. The separation between myth and real man was never simple. To his fans, he was untouchable. To his family, he was human, vulnerable, and sometimes even distant. This journey will take you to a place few have been able to visit, the intimacy of Muhammad Ali, revealed in stories told by those who lived alongside him. They will be accounts of tenderness and pain, of laughter and tears, of decisions that transformed his life into a public spectacle, but which also took a silent toll. Here, we will talk not only about the idol, but also about the man who struggled with his own shadows. You'll discover the Ali who sat at the dinner table with his children, the Ali who cried in secret, the Ali who embraced friends like brothers. A man torn between being the hero the world wanted and the simple person who just wanted to be understood. And perhaps, in the end, you'll realize that the myth was merely a reflection of the extraordinary but deeply real human being who existed behind it. It was night in Louisville, and Muhammad Ali arrived silently, trying to escape the flashbulbs that still followed him even after the ring lights were turned off. But inside the house, there were no photographers, no commentators extolling his victories. There were only children's voices running through the living room, bare feet on the carpet, and small arms ready to embrace him as if he was simply daddy. Ali would leave his gloves at the door, lift the weight of glory from his shoulders, and, for a few moments, immerse himself in a world where he had nothing to prove. His children remember the smile that broke out when he lifted them into the air, as if demonstrating that, even after knocking out giants, the greatest pleasure was playing airplane with those who carried his blood. It was in this intimate space that the myth was shattered, revealing a weary man, but also a present father, who sought to balance public life with family life. Still, it wasn't always easy. The trips, the fights, the interviews, everything took him away from everyday life. The children learned to live with his absence, with bags packed at the door, with repeated goodbyes. But his presence alone made everything worthwhile. He would sit at the table, tell exaggerated stories, make faces and jokes that drew laughter. His children didn't see the world champion. They saw the man who knew how to laugh at himself, who wore the legend's costume to enchant, not to frighten. One of his close friends would say, years later, he was bigger there than any ring. But inside the house he was smaller, because he insisted on fitting into his children's lives. And there was something curious. Even when his body began to show signs of fatigue, when Parkinson's was already whispering its presence, Ali insisted on showing his children vitality. He joked, demonstrated slow boxing movements, but with the same fierce look, as if to say, I'm still here, strong for you. It was this insistence on being a father above any title that revealed the true Ali, a man who, before his family, ceased to be a legend and became simply human. In the end, the myth slept outside the door, and the only one left was Cassius, the man who carried the surname Clay before becoming Ali, the father who sought at every moment to teach that love was also a struggle, and perhaps the most important of all, that, and if at home he was a father, in his wife's heart he was a husband. But this relationship would reveal even more intimate sides of the man behind the myth. Inside the home, when the doors closed and the applause remained outside, Muhammad Ali ceased to be the greatest and became simply the man who shared his life with his wife. But this balance wasn't always simple. Marriage to Ali carried a weight few women in the world could carry. On one side, there was the loving, playful husband, capable of delivering an impromptu serenade in the middle of the kitchen, eliciting unexpected laughter. On the other, there was the champion constantly absent, absorbed in travel, training, and commitments. Fame demanded a public version of Ali that didn't always match the quiet intimacy of his married life. His wife often saw him torn, trying to be present at a dinner party but with a distant gaze, still caught up in the echo of the arenas and the speeches the world awaited from him. Close friends recall that Ali could be intense in love, but he could also be tempestuous, a victim of the pressures he carried on his shoulders. There were times when fights arose over small things: a delay, an unexplained absence, a misinterpreted gesture. At these times, the myth disappeared, and a vulnerable man emerged, with flaws, jealousies, and insecurities. His wife, in later interviews, would say that living with him was like dancing with a storm, sometimes gentle and enchanting, sometimes devastating. But even through the hardships, there was one truth that held them together. Ollie needed someone to remind him that, behind the championship title, there was still a man who needed to be loved not for what he represented, but for who he truly was. Despite the tensions, there were also moments of profound tenderness. Ollie the husband wrote simple notes, left unexpected flowers, made a point of saying "I love you" before every trip, as if afraid that the world, with its relentless speed, wouldn't give him time to repeat those words. It was in these moments that his humanity revealed itself most. The giant the world knew transformed into a man who feared losing the affection of those who mattered most. This duality between husband and myth created a contrast that humanized Ali, showing that even the greatest legends carry the same pains, mistakes, and desires as any ordinary human being. And here's where an important pause is in order. If you've been feeling Ali's humanity so far, this intimate side that's rarely been shown, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what surprised you most so far. This helps us continue bringing you stories that reveal the human side behind the legends. But while his children saw him as a father and his wife as a husband, there was another Ali the friend, the one who shared confidences, laughter, and tears, and that's where the story becomes even more revealing. For his closest friends, Muhammad Ali was never just the boxer the world revered. He was the laughing companion, the man who would arrive unannounced for coffee and small talk, as if he didn't carry the weight of being a global icon on his shoulders. Ali had the gift of transforming any encounter into a private spectacle. He did impressions, told jokes, laughed out loud, but amidst the joy, there were also deep silences that revealed the weariness of someone who, in front of his friends, could finally let his guard down. Many remember that, when he sat with them away from the cameras, he liked to talk about fears and insecurities he would never reveal in public. He spoke about the loneliness of traveling, the fear of disappointing his children, and even the internal struggle against the image the world projected of him. Among friends, Ali was generous. If someone needed help, he would lend a hand without hesitation, even when it meant exposing himself to criticism or putting his own reputation at risk. Once upon learning that a friend was facing financial troubles, he simply wrote a check, no questions asked, simply saying, "I don't want you to go through this alone." Gestures like these showed that, behind the legend was a man who valued loyalty above all else. But friendship with Ollie wasn't just about laughter and kindness. He could also be tough, confronting friends when he perceived them as straying from their own values. His sometimes uncomfortable sincerity was seen as proof of true love because he believed that a true friend doesn't applaud mistakes, but points the way. And there was something even more intimate. His friends bore witness to his silent battle with Parkinson's. They were the ones who saw his hands tremble before anyone in the audience, who heard his voice falter in private conversations. But instead of hiding it, Ollie transformed his pain into humor. "Look," he would say with a laugh, "even my body decided to dance with me." This sense of humor in the face of tragedy was what kept not only his friends alive, but also his own soul. To them, Ollie was not a distant myth, but a brother who shared secrets, laughter, and tears. Being friends with Muhammad Ali meant bearing the honor of living alongside the legend, but also the responsibility of protecting the fragile man who existed behind the facade. And this man, however giant he was, also sought, on the shoulders of his friends, the comfort he never found in the crowd. But if as a friend he displayed loyalty and humanity, there was an even more complex aspect, Ali's internal struggle against the weight of his own legend, where myth and man became It is this intimate battle that we will delve into in the next chapter. In the darkness of his room, before the sun touched the curtains, Ollie stared at the mirror as if facing an old adversary. The myth slept on the folded newspaper on the table. Before him, only the man. He practiced the smile the audience wanted to see, but his face betrayed fatigue. His hand trembled, lightly, like a truth that refused to be silenced. He breathed deeply, his fists clenched, remembering the boy from Louisville who ran between cramped houses. "I'm Ali," he said softly, "but I still carry Cassius with me." This whisper wasn't nostalgia, it was conflict. Fame demanded eternal brilliance. His body craved rest. Between the roar of the arenas and the silence of the kitchen, he tried to stitch together two lives. And each morning, he promised not to lose the man to preserve the myth. He closed his eyes and said a short prayer, asking for calm and courage. He put on his coat slowly, as if each button were a round. He remembered his coach, "Conquer yourself first." He knew, Defeating the world is easy. The hard part is not losing yourself along the way. Always their empty gymnasium creaked under the tall lamps. There he walked across the stage as if visiting a sacred and dangerous place. He raised his hands, touched the air, and began to wrestle with his own shadow. Each step reminded him that myth desired spectacle, man, only truth. His body responded slowly, and the delay hurt. I'm not a bronze statue, he murmured. I'm flesh. He marked time with an antique clock. The ticking sounded like an impatient judge. Jab, dodge, breath. Memory did the rest, drawing movements that the muscle could no longer sustain. Sweat fell like a confession. A harsh thought came to him. When the audience applauds the past, how can we move forward? Then he remembered why he fought. It wasn't just for belts. It was for dignity. It was for having said no to war when the world demanded obedience. It was to prove that courage isn't about never falling. It's about getting up, knowing it will hurt. He sat on the bench. Today, I trained to be whole, not invincible. The echo fell. The shadow retreated. He won the round. In hospitals, schools, and churches, the myth opened paths. There he entered, and faces shone. Children held up signs. The elderly asked for blessings. The sick held his hand as if holding out hope. He knew what to say. You are strong, he repeated, looking into their eyes. In the photograph, the hero. Minutes later, in the empty hallway, the man gasping for breath. The mask weighed heavily. In the parked car, he stared at the street and let the silence speak. A friend driving by ventured, "Nobody expects you to save the world." Ollie replied without raising his voice. "But one day, I promised." It wasn't vanity. It was a debt to the boy who had been beaten by racism and vowed never to bow his head again. Each visit was a round outside the ring. Each hug, a reminder that the myth fueled the courage of others, while the man learned to live with his own pain. At the end, he asked for 5 minutes alone. He leaned his forehead on the steering wheel and wrote down 3 words. Serve, listen, care. I put the smile back on at home. I touched photos and whispered, thanks. The turnaround wasn't a sudden victory. It was a series of small, almost invisible choices. There he learned to separate the altar from the home. On stage, he offered his presence. At home, he offered his time. He began to say no to invitations that robbed him of his own. He accepted that his voice could fail and still communicate greatness. He called the illness by its name and placed it on the table, as one might introduce a difficult guest. You're not the boss of me, he would say softly. He began to value routines, walking early, listening to his children's stories, giving thanks for the bread. He discovered that courage also means asking for help. The myth continued to exist for the world. The man finally breathed without a mask. And there, in simplicity, he rediscovered the joy that couldn't be contained in trophies. He wrote unpublished letters. He asked for forgiveness. He forgave. He guided young people to protect their heads and hearts. At an event, he took off his gloves and told a boy, fight for the ones you love. He looked at the ring and understood. He could say goodbye without disappearing. The question remained, what remains when the myth falls silent? The house is calm. The morning filters through the window. And in the hallway, a row of photos stitches together time. The young Cassius who promised never to bow his head. The champion Ollie who set the world on fire. The father kneeling to tie his son's shoelace. He passes slowly, as if touching a family altar. He no longer needs to prove anything. The tremor is there, but it doesn't define the scene. What defines it is the gentle, firm gaze, accepting his own path. In the kitchen, he gives thanks for the bread, kisses the one he loves, takes a deep breath. Outside, the myth still lives in the murals and headlines. Inside, the man rests. He remembers the ancient promise, to serve, to listen, to care. And he decides to fulfill it once again, not with blows, but with presence. The legend can shake the world. Man today chooses to sustain the house with a simple gesture. He sits, holds a hand, and stays. And, in this lingering gesture, the myth rests, and man finds meaning again. To be, to listen, to care, that's all. Now, the stories of those who knew him don't sound like legends. They sound like memories that smell of coffee, restrained laughter, and half-open doors. A daughter remembers her father who tempered fear with humor, transforming difficult nights into small victories. A friend recalls the hug that saved an entire day, when sadness weighed more heavily than his body. A wife describes the silence after the fight, the apology spoken with her eyes, the flower left on the counter. These scenes don't enter the belt, but they sustain the invisible biography, that of the small gestures that hold a family together. There wasn't perfect there, and no one tries to paint it that way. There were absences, failures, broken promises, But there was also the insistent choice to return, to sit at the table, to listen until the end. When asked how to separate the myth from the man, the family answers simply, the myth climbed into the ring. The man came downstairs, served water, and asked if everything was okay. This is how the legend loses its luster and the person gains light. Truly, the separation between myth and man is not a cut. It is a patient stitch. The myth screams, competes for stage, seeks eternity. Man whispers, waters, plants, learns to apologize. For years, Ollie had to reconcile these two worlds, until he understood that he shouldn't kill one to sustain the other. He decided to let the legend serve the human, not the other way around. Thus, courage ceased to be just a fist and became presence, being there when it hurts, listening when tired, loving when you fail. This is the victory no one holds high, but which changes everything. Because titles decorate walls, care sustains lives. When the lights dim and the audience leaves, you remain who you are in the kitchen chair, before those who know your flaws and still call you by name. Ollie understood this late, but in time you didn't need to win every round to be at home. It was enough not to run away. And, without running away, he taught something. Greatness is daily discipline, practiced in the same place, with the same people. But Muhammad Ali, in the end, doesn't just fit on the pedestal of history. He fits on the kitchen chair, in the photo op, in the embrace that comes before words. He was a father, a husband, a friend. He was flawed, stubborn, generous. He was a legend when he had to pave the way. He was a man when he had to hold them. If the question was who he was behind the myth, the answer appears in the details. In the forgiveness he asked, in the glass of water he served, in the silence that doesn't hurt. Ollie left us a lesson that doesn't depend on the ring. Courage is remaining whole when your body trembles. It's loving without applause. It's returning home even when the world calls. When the fight ends and the lights go out, the names spoken in whispers remain. Father, husband, friend, and, among them, a final credo that guides common steps. Greatness may be born in the ring, but it only lasts when it learns to live in everyday life. Beyond the legend, there was a man, and that man, finally, conquered what matters most, life itself, lived with dignity. This memory remains. And that's it. Muhammad Ali taught us that being great isn't just about lifting belts or challenging the powerful. Being great is also about standing up for yourself every day, accepting your own flaws, and still choosing to keep going. He was a legend on stage, but he was human behind the scenes. And it's in this humanity that true strength lies. Getting to know the man behind the legend, we realize that courage isn't about never falling, but about getting up again and again, even when your body no longer obeys. Even when your voice fails, even when silence seems heavier than any adversary. Ollie showed that greatness is learning to laugh at pain, to love despite absences, to forgive even when it would be easier to remain silent. This story isn't just about boxing or glory. It's about the daily choices that shape who we are. Ollie could have lost himself in the glow of fame, but he chose to hold his family's hand tightly, hug his friends, visit hospitals, and speak to children. He understood that myth inspired multitudes, but the man could transform lives. That's why his legacy isn't limited to punches or victories, but to values that endure: loyalty, courage, faith, compassion. His every simple gesture a joke to ease the pain, a word to lift someone who's fallen, a silence of understanding became as powerful as any world title. And that's the lesson. Life's most important fight doesn't happen in front of the cameras, but inside the home, in the heart, in everyday life. When we look at Ollie, we remember that we all have two sides, the one we show the world, and the one we keep hidden. The challenge is not to let myths suffocate our humanity, but also not to let our weaknesses prevent us from moving forward. If Muhammad Ali, despite so many struggles, managed to be a father, a husband, a friend, and an eternal symbol, we too can find the strength to face our own daily rings. And perhaps, in the end, what truly matters is not what we achieve in front of the crowd, but what we sustain in the silence of our homes: love, faith, dignity. Ali's trajectory is a powerful reminder. No matter how many times life knocks us down, there's always a chance to get back up. It doesn't matter if our body trembles or our voice falters. What matters is the choice to keep going, to fight not to be immortalized in statues, but to be remembered by those who truly matter. Because true victory is this: to live in such a way that, when the myth fades, the human being still shines. Muhammad Ali proved that it is possible to be both a legend and a man, and now, it's up to us to learn from him and keep fighting, not just for titles, but for the life we want to build, blow by blow, step by step, until the final round.